Okay, welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Johnny,
And I'm Darin.
and today we're going to talk about The Deer Hunter, 1978, Michael Cimino film, correct?
Yep.
I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but looks like Cimino or Cimino, but Cimino, I guess, is the right way to say it. So Darin, I chose this one, and I told you I hadn't seen it before, and that was true, but when I chose it, I had just recently watched it, so I've seen it twice now. And I kind of want to just briefly go over my experience with the first time that I saw it. And okay, it was just like a month ago when I knew I was going to pick this movie for our podcast, and I wanted to make sure I'd seen it. So I threw it. Actually, I had to rent it because I couldn't find it on Netflix. But now it's on Netflix, so now it's like I had to anyway. I had to rent it. But I watched it, and I had to say I wasn't that impressed. I knew about the Russian roulette scenes. I'd seen little clips here and there, so I knew what was coming when those scenes came up. I knew what to expect. And so I wasn't really surprised by any of that, or I wasn't like, shocked or anything. But and I want to say that those are probably the most interesting scenes in the movie. Like everything else to me wasn't really that intriguing. Um I know that there's a lot of like, exposition and character development they're trying to get in there, and they're trying to like, build this world of these like, Rust Belt steel workers and, the blue collar, rough and tough deer hunting type, folk.
Yeah.
And I get all that. But my first initial thought when I saw it was that this movie is too long, and there was way too much of the getting to know these characters with the wedding reception, with the you know at the bar, the steel mill, the preparing for the wedding, the ceremony, just all that stuff. It took an hour and 4 minutes to get through all that, and I was like, why? What am I sitting through all this for? You know what I mean? It felt like a waste. I feel like that could have been condensed down to maybe like half an hour at the most is what you would need to get all that across. But once it got to Vietnam and it started going, I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. It was kind of fun. And I got through it. And at the end, it is rather emotional. And so I understood, the impact that it had at the time, especially. So I was like, okay, this is a pretty good movie. I can see why people liked it. I can't see why it won Best Picture, but I still think it was there's some decent acting moments in the movie, and there's some. I wouldn't say the script's very good, but I mean it's fine, I guess. But yeah, overall, I really wasn't that impressed. But I was glad that I got to see it, and I was glad that we're here to talk about it now. But I want to get your opinion on it when you first saw it and what you thought.
Well, right. I mean, basically all the stuff that you're saying, it makes like if you're. When did you say you watched? Did you watch it as a
About a
teenager or
month
how
ago.
old?
About a
But
month ago.
oh, you was a month. Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
You watched for the first time a month ago. So I saw it during that '90s stretch where I started watching everything. So just like The Godfather, The Deer Hunter was another one, and I think back then, with it winning Best Picture, I always look at Oscars as a zeitgeist kind of thing. It captured the zeitgeist, and so that's why we have the benefit of hindsight now, where we can look at it and go, well, this, like we talked about in The Godfather, this was kind of off, that was kind of off. Why did this win Best Picture? And I think we forget a lot of times that the Oscars are very reactive, like as of that year. It just an Oscar in the box office, it just gives you the idea of what was popular at the time. And so I think we need to remember that. I think that, and some Oscars, they get it right every now and then, but it's so it being a Best Picture thing. That's why I wanted to. It was on the checklist, and it's got Robert De Niro, it's got Christopher Walken, Meryl Streep, John Savage, John Cazale, George DeZunza, who was in Crimson Tide that we talked about last season. So it's got all of these people that I know and I recognized, and I knew Michael Cimino's name from a movie called Heaven's Gate. It was like and we'll talk about Cimino in a little bit, was a big box office critical bomb and kind of like the auteur theory kind of crumbling. But so again, it was all a checklist movie. And so I finally, and again, watching it, like I talked about with The Godfather, I got why everybody liked it so much, even though it wasn't my favorite. Watching The Deer Hunter, yeah, it was emotional, but I'm kind of with you that first viewing. It was just, you get to the point where you're like, I thought this is a movie about Vietnam. Like, why is it an hour and 4 hour and 7 minutes and we still haven't gotten to Vietnam yet? Right? Why are we still getting to know these characters? And then, yeah, like you said, I had that same, the Vietnam stuff, the Russian roulette stuff is intense and all this other things. And, oh yeah, it's emotional how it wraps up. But I had the same opinion as you. And I agree with you too. When you say that the script wasn't as good, because I think it started off as like a movie called either The Man Who Came to Play, was about Las Vegas and Russian roulette, and then Michael Cimino took like the Russian roulette and kind of twisted it to capture again the zeitgeist of Vietnam at the time. I think that the script isn't good, but I think the script is more, it seems to me, I don't know if maybe you agree with this, like even now watching, even back then and watching it now, it just seems like he was like, here's a situation, I'm just going to let the actors go with it. So there's not really anything scripted. It just feels like a lot of everything is improvised. You know what I mean? And a lot of people they're just trying to feel out their characters. And so I think the screenplay is more of like a jumping point for the actors and the characters finding themselves. That makes any sense? So I don't know if it's well written. I think it's very well acted. But as well written, I don't know. Does that make sense? There's a weird dichotomy. It doesn't seem written to me. It just seems like they're trying to go for like a real life working class kind of feel where these are people that we know and all this stuff. So I think I don't know, that's the difference between like writing, like in The Godfather, you could tell that a lot of stuff is written. A lot of, like, Michael's character is written to be funneled into this world and you feel like it's a movie. I never, except for the Vietnam parts, especially the Vietnam parts, I felt like those were movie-ish, but everything else didn't feel like a movie. It felt more like a documentary, like trying to capture something. I think, I don't know, when you watch it the first time, that's what your mind kind of goes with. You want to watch that movie. You know what I mean? You don't want to watch all this side getting to know you cinema verite stuff. You want to get to the stuff that feels like a movie because that's what you're watching it for, a movie. Yeah. And I had a very different reaction watching it again this week. But yeah, I'm with you. Like that first reaction was like, well, I guess I watched it. I like certain things and it's well made, I guess. And then I just moved on to the next thing.
Yeah. Well, I can see what you say about like, having the script be like a guide or something, and that's fine. Some movies that works. You can have a guide. You can have like, a plot point, or this has to happen, and this character does this, and then they let the actors go for it. There's a lot of successful shows and movies that do that, and so I can see that being, a thing they may have tried, but I don't think it was as successful as they wanted it to be. But also, wasn't it made into a book after the movie came out? Like I think there was a book that was written after the fact.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Probably. I mean, novelizations all the time, but the screenplay definitely went through iterations, and there's controversy of who wrote it, whether there was Cimino or Derek Washburn or who did what. So it's Cimino's a very high on himself kind of person. And you listen to him talking, he comes off as very like pretentious and things like that. So I don't know. I think for the 70s, I think it worked to get him in the director's chair. And then after that with Heaven's Gate, that's where it kind of lost that whole attitude of giving, like we talked about with The Godfather, giving directors carte blanche to do whatever they wanted. And so Deer Hunter was a big enough success that they let him do that with his next movie, and it just went south. And I guess some directors shouldn't be given full control like that, but that's something we can definitely talk about. But yeah, that was long-winded way of explaining our history with the movie and the difference between then and now, I think.
Yeah, after I told my wife that I watched it, like she said, how was it? And I said, well, there's a lot of pushing and shoving and slapping and kicking going on. So they had to rein in this movie, pushy and shovey and slappy and kicky or whatever. So I thought to watch it the second time before tonight, and I decided to kind of maybe count how many times I saw someone slap somebody or push somebody or shove somebody. And the very first slap that I noticed was like 4 minutes in. We're already getting some slaps on the heads and slaps on the back, and then it just kept happening, kept snowballing, and I kept trying to count, but kept losing count because there were so many of it. In the first part, where they're at their job and they're getting off work and they're going through the locker room and to the showers and getting out, there's like 20 or 21 push or shoves or slaps, like just in that little moment. Just in that little moment, and I was like, what are we doing here? Like, why is there so much pushing and shoving? Is that because they're trying to improvise and they're trying to, like, I don't know. I feel like I had friends and I have work acquaintances and coworkers, but we don't slap and push and shove each other that much. Even the ones I'm close to, I don't do it that much. There's like a boundary that you don't cross. I'm fine with giving someone a high five or a handshake or a pat in the back, but to give them a headlock and push and shove them and kick them down the stairs, and then it just kept happening with Meryl Streep's dad hits her twice. They go to the wedding reception, everyone's getting drunk, so everyone's like pushing each other over, falling down, kicking each other. What's his name? Cazale hits his girlfriend, and then it's okay if
Yeah.
he just kisses it better. It's like, what am I watching? Like, why is there so much of this? I understand, like, they were trying to get across that they're friends and they have this like relationship and they're tough guys, and that's fine. But man, oh man, we gotta like find a way to control this. It seemed like it got out of control. And
Yeah.
even though I can say I liked it better the second time watching it, I was still getting super annoyed by how many times someone got pushed or shoved or slapped or kicked or punched or whatever. It was super, super violent in like a weird kind of way. And I was like, I just didn't get it. I didn't get why I kept having to watch these people push each other around.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think it was that improvisatory kind of, they're trying things on, they're seeing what works. But I agree with you. It's like we don't need to see it that many times. You know what I mean? I absolutely get what they're going for. Like they are going for that documentary feel. It does feel like a working class town. It does feel like the steel mill is like their whole reason for, and towns were and are like that. You know what I mean? I think that I don't. We'll talk about it when we get to it. But like by the end of the movie, I didn't mind the long stuff so much because I felt like I knew these people like inside and out. They didn't feel like movie characters. They felt like just people that happened to be in the situation. You know what I mean? But going back to the all the slaps and all the pushing, I do agree with you. Think that was just it worked. Let's just keep going. And it's Cimino, not well. That's enough. Like I get it. Like we don't have to keep doing that over and over and over again. You know what I mean? So it does definitely have that feel, but I would agree with you in that I personally didn't need to see it that many times to get the point. Like after 2 or 3 shoves, I get it. Like you don't have to keep doing it, even though it's a character thing between them. I just think that it's like something that they kind of picked up on and they kept going with it. And I don't think it's entirely successful, even though I get the point. You know what I mean? And the Cazal character, the way that he brandishes that pistol, the way that he hits his girlfriend, right? And then it's okay, like it's just something that he does, right? And then at the end when they come back and he didn't go to war, but it's Mike that went to war, and how Mike, there's that scene where he's shoot, what's the Cazal character's name?
Dan or Stosh?
Stanley, yeah, Stosh they called him. So there's the part where he's like playing with the Zunza character, and he's like pointing the gun at him, pointing the gun at John, right? And then Mike sees it and he freaks out and like, you're not being responsible with this. I've been through true terror and you're treating it like a game. So that's where he gets upset. So
Yeah.
that stuff, it didn't, like, you didn't need to see Cazal slap his girlfriend 3 or 4 times. He just did it once because he's sitting there with John and they're looking at it was funny seeing Joe Grafasi as the wedding singer or whatever,
Right.
but he's
Yeah.
like, he's dancing with her and he's over with John. He's like, can you see what he's doing? Look at what he's doing. I see
Right.
what he's doing, right?
Yeah.
And he goes up and the first thing he does is he punches his girlfriend out. Like
Right.
his girlfriend's got a glass jaw and it's, whoa. It's like, why did he? Because I think that it's this weird, the movie's about machismo and what that does, like how that's kind of broken down. And his idea of having the pistol that he waves around and punching his girlfriend, it's the tough guy's idea of what it is to be tough, even though it's like, you're slapping around a woman. What's tough about that? You know what I mean?
He knocks her out.
Yeah,
Like,
it knocks her out. Like it's like, whoa. And she's down on the ground and everybody's like, oh, it's funny. It's like, well, but
yeah.
that is all to a point. That is all to say it's about, like I said, the machismo. It's about how the 3 friends go and they come back and everything's different. And yeah, we as audience members, we can even see that that's a joke, right? He slapped his girlfriend and knocked her out. Like, what a pansy. Like, how is this guy a tough guy? So I like that. But we didn't have to see him do it 3 or 4 times to get the point. He just did it once and it made enough of an impact. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Meryl Streep getting hit, like I get the first time, but the second time she gets hit, even though I get that her father's abusive, like even though it was like redundant, it really hurt her. Like you could see, like the first time it just kind of took her by shock, and the second time she's in real pain, and it hits that point of she needs to get out of that house. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And so a lot of that stuff, and the way that it was in the script is Streep's character, Linda's character, was not fleshed out at all. You can say she's not fleshed out now, but Cimino told Streep, make up your own lines, like add your own stuff, make your own character. And I think if not for Streep and if not for some of the characteristics she brought to that, it wouldn't have been a strong character. I think she makes an impact more than what was in the original script. But again, I agree with you. It's like she gets hit twice. We don't need to see her get hit twice to understand the relationship she's in.
yeah. Okay, I want to mention this because we're kind of still in the beginning parts of the movie before we get to the whole Vietnam stuff.
Yeah.
There's a moment in the bar scene when they first show up after work or whatever. By the way, do they work the night shift?
Yeah,
They're
I
getting
think
off
so.
the night shift and they're going to the bar and they're going to go to a wedding that night. So no one's
Yeah.
going to go home and go to bed and go to sleep. No one's getting
Nope.
any sleep to this day.
Nope.
They're going to go get fucked. Then they're going to go
Yeah.
then go to Vietnam the next day. But anyway, so they go to the bar and they set up this shot where they're kind of putting down the bar and you see Cazale and everybody kind of lined up in the bar. And for a while they're following, the 180-degree rule where they're not jumping the line. They're going back and forth. And then suddenly it jumps the line. Now the camera is on the other side of the bar and shooting the opposite direction or vice versa. And so it kind of like it was jarring to me. I was like, whoa, what just happened? Like, what am I looking at now? So I didn't know all of a sudden people in different places. And so Cazale stood up in some place and I was like, he was supposed to be over there, but he
Yeah.
wasn't. He's over here now. And like on the other side of the screen. And I was so I kept thinking, what happened there? And so the second time watching it, I wanted to make sure I saw what I saw so I can, talk about this and not be, incorrect or anything. They did jump the line. Like they did. And that's a no-no. And so it kind of made, unless there's a reason for it,
Yeah.
unless you wanted to establish, something's wrong in this situation, or there's movies that do it and do it, so well. Like Requiem for a Dream, there's a scene where he's talking to his mom and the camera slowly jumps the line and you go, oh, what just happened? And you feel it and you feel this crazy, this chill go up your spine when you see it happen. But in this movie, they do it and they do it so abruptly and out of place for no reason. And I was like, that was weird. Like I'm just not sure where to put the camera and what was the point of that. And so when I watched it again, I kind of like watched it slowly to make sure that it didn't happen. And it does happen. I know you wanted to talk about the cinematography and the cinematographer and everything, but what do you think? Do you think that that was done on purpose? Was that something that might have been a mistake? Maybe they left it in for some reason?
To me, I feel kind of bad. I didn't notice the jump the line. I'm not sure why I didn't. But I get what you're saying. I know that Ozu is very famous for purposely moving things in the camera and jumping the line like that to make you aware that you're watching a movie. For it to happen here, I don't think, like I said before, like the whole thing before Vietnam, it doesn't feel like a movie, right? So for them to jump the line and do something like that on purpose is weird because you're making me aware that it's a movie. Maybe it happens right before Vietnam and that's why it wants to make that switch. I don't know. But like it could have to do with the improvisational stuff that was going on or just trying things as it went, or maybe they shot on different days and the continuity person was asleep. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. I do know that it's weird because we talked about Gordon Willis for The Godfather, and now we're talking about Vilmos Zsigmond, who's going from that level of cinematographer to this level of cinematographer. The guy who's worked with Altman and McCabe and Mrs. Miller. He did The Long Goodbye, Sugarland Express for Spielberg, Close Encounters of the Third Kind for Spielberg, where he won the Oscar, Witches of Eastwick, Maverick. He did just recently, Ghost in the Darkness, The Black Dahlia. So very famous cinematographer. When I saw his name, I kind of pricked up again. I was like, oh, I forgot that he did the cinematography for this, right? And his cinematography adds to the feel of everybody being human. I don't know if that makes any sense. He would light a shot to get he would talk to the art director, like when they were designing shots, right? He would talk to I think the art directors were Ron Hobbs and Kim Swados, but he would talk to them and kind of get a feel for how they were going to block things and how things were set up so that he could light actors in a certain way that felt very crisp and very natural. So it highlighted who the people were. So we had a way of shooting things, and I think that the cinema verite feel for this movie, I think he's perfect for that, because it feels like a documentary. They shot in, tans and browns on the inside and blues on the outside. The steel mill a lot of times is in the background of almost, every shot, like,
Yeah,
or
I
major
noticed that. Yeah.
shots. Right when Mike or De Niro, he's running naked down the street after you see it in the background, like, and they keep cutting back to it. And again, the steel mill is a sign of Americana. I mean, you don't get more American than working in a steel mill, than playing baseball, you know what I mean, than driving around a Chevrolet. They could do different things to make it feel like America. I think the steel mill is a great metaphor for this is what America is, and how it can be, this plant that's like just so solid can be the whole focus of a town, right? But even the people around it can be correct. So yeah, all the cinematography, it's so fascinating. And the trailers, like, they were able to shoot in a trailer, and they built that trailer that they could remove walls, so they could just place the camera wherever they wanted, right? The same thing with the cage in Vietnam later. They could take it apart and they could shoot from different angles so that they could have freedom in there. So again, very
Okay.
realistic. So for it to have a cinema verite feel, and then for it to maybe cut to, jump the line, like you said, I don't know. Like I said, I didn't notice it. I don't know if for you though, it made you aware that you were
Mhm.
watching a movie all of a sudden, right?
Right.
So in that regard, I think it's a mistake, or kind of a flub. But again, I can't speak for it. There's nothing. All the research I was doing on the movie didn't say anything about that. I think
I
maybe
mentioned this
trying it on.
before we started recording. There's a shot in the church when the mother, Stephen's mother, is talking to the priest, and she's complaining about her son getting married to this strange girl.
Yeah,
And the camera, it's kind of far away, and you're not seeing the actors very close up. So and the priest is like wandering around, and she's like trying to talk to him, but he won't stand still. And then as after the conversation is over, after it's over, the camera starts moving back even farther away than it already was. And I didn't understand what the point of that movement was, because you didn't really establish anything. Like, if I didn't know that was the mother already, I wouldn't know who this old lady was and
yeah.
what's going on here. Because anyway, so it was a weird choice to set up the shot so far away and then to move even farther away after the scene was over.
Yeah.
So another thing that I thought was weird with the cinematography.
Right, right. Yeah, there are some weird choices. Like, there's a difference between what a shot looks like and what a shot is going for. Like, again, they're really going for the Godfather feel. I think the Godfather was such a big hit that they, elongating the wedding sequence in the
Yeah,
Godfather
yeah,
to
it's like
like
a
a
20-minute wedding scene
yeah,
for
it's like 45
the
minutes, or you know what I mean. So to make that even longer, and again, I get the point. You're trying to get a beat on the characters, but you could cut down on. There are different ways of doing that, like we talked about. You know what I mean? It's just watching it again this time and knowing that, because again, I didn't necessarily want to sit down for it because my memories were like, and again, the emotions and stuff that were strong in my memory, but I was like, I don't want to sit through the really long, boring stuff. You know what I mean? I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
But this time watching it, I was kind of fascinated by it. It did. Again, I'm going to agree with you. It did go on. Maybe it didn't need to go on that long, but I was just constantly. My brain was working, so I was engaged, and I was never bored,
Okay.
because I was like, why is it from this angle? Why is it taking so long after they've said this line of dialogue to cut to the next line of dialogue? Why did this shot last as long as it did? Why is it bright like this? Why is it dark like this? So I was constantly wondering, well, what's the point? And so my brain was constantly thinking, this has to mean something, right? But I don't know if it's, some critics really thought this is the greatest American picture since The Godfather. Other people thought it was pretentious at the time, some critics. And it could go either way. Like, you know what I mean? You could be watching a movie like this and it could be doing these long, drawn out things. And you could be watching going, this is art. This is cinema. You know what I mean? Or it could be, get on with it. Like, why are you being so pretentious about this? Like, you don't have
Yeah.
to show me these long shots. So it could go either way. And even though I get what they were trying to do, even though I get that it went on way too long, I just thought that it was more about feeling than about plot. It's more about, because I think before we talked or we recorded here, The Godfather is moving you from piece to piece to piece. You feel like it's moving you from piece to piece, right? This doesn't feel like that. This just feels like it's an hour and 4 minutes of character beats, getting to know what this person's doing, getting to know what that person's doing. You get the two bridesmaids or the three bridesmaids that are running around. I get a great feel for who those three girls are, even though they don't show up again after Vietnam. You know what I mean? I get the mother when she comes into the bar and when she grabs Savage and she's taking him out, you know, stuff like that. I like that they're outside and Steven asserts himself. He's like, I love this girl. I'm going to marry her. Like, you can't stop me, right? He's kind of becoming a man. Again, it's that machismo stuff. And then you go after that long wedding sequence, you go with them on the deer hunt, right? And well, before we get to the deer hunt, what did you think of De Niro like stripping down and running naked to the streets? What did you think?
I didn't understand what that was all about. Like, I didn't understand what that was.
Yeah.
What was that was for? Like, I was like, okay, like, because we haven't seen De Niro naked yet.
Yeah. Well, it's a again very actorly thing. I like that Walken sits down. You know, they after he calms down, he puts the jacket on. He sits down, and it hurts him to sit down. I guess because he's sore or whatever, and they just talk. You know what I
like
mean?
that
It's like,
Walken puts down a really dirty rag.
yeah, to sit on, right, instead of sitting on the wet cement.
Yeah.
But and again, that's the thing that Zsigmond did is they made sure everything. They shot this during the summer, and so they wanted to give it like a fall feel or an autumn feel. So they took the leaves down from the trees. They sprayed like a coloring all over the grass, so it gave it like a brownish color. And so they sprayed water on, so it made it feel cold. Again, the blues of the outside make it feel like cold. You feel, again, it's about the feeling, right? So when they sit down, and Walken says, I need you to make sure that we come back from this, right? And they have that heart to heart. It's like, yeah, they're bonding. So the naked stuff was weird. Maybe that's what happened. You know, you get drunk, you know what I mean? And that's, you just feel like that's what you do. You know,
any alcohol anymore.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, and then it goes to the deer hunt, and they're, again, it's not about plot. It's about that character stuff. I like when they stop and they leave John, like they keep driving off. Yeah, that was pretty funny. And that's stuff that friends do.
I was going to talk about that because they dig out of the car to go to the bathroom, and then they get back in the car and they leave John behind or whatever. And then it's a big joke. And yeah, it's kind of funny. But again, it just,
it goes on.
Sit there and it goes on. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What am I doing? What are we watching this for? Like, yeah, it's a nice, pretty landscape shot of the lake and the mountains and the trees and stuff. But you've got this really long shot that doesn't do anything. And then they finally drive away and it kind of zooms into the mountains. I'm like, what is going on? You know, like, I'm trying to figure this out as I'm watching it, and I probably should just stop trying to figure it out.
and again, maybe just get a feel for it, right? Yeah, and again, it goes, they leave him like twice. He's like, don't F around, you know what I mean? So is it the Zunza character, or is it the other friend?
I thought it was John that they left behind.
Okay, all right, but yeah.
I've been Axel, I don't know.
Okay, so yeah, anyway, so they're in the car, right? And they stop, and then it has the whole thing with, like, you know, shoot, I keep forgetting his name. Stanley Stosh. Like, he forgets to get dressed, forgets his boots. And then it has that whole thing where Mike is sitting on the hood. He's like, no, I'm not going to do this. Like, I'm sick of this. And it's a whole scene that lasts for like, what, it feels like 10 minutes, right? And again, I get the point, but it goes on. Like, it goes on.
You know what that reminded me of? It reminded me of the time we went to Disneyland or whatever, and I forgot to bring my money. And Farmer was like, no, I'm not paying for your food. I thought that reminds me of me.
Right. Anyway. Right. But again, that's Mike trying to teach, again, Stanley. He's trying to teach him, like, you know, teach about life and teach him how to be a man and stuff like that, right? And, you know, the boots and everything. And so I get all that. But it's all there. Again, no plot. There's no plot happening. You're just getting to know characters through specific beats. There's no specific thing that's driving something forward. It's sitting back and it's letting you watch this kind of thing play out. And again, there's a charm to that. And I feel like Cimino, for most of the time, was sitting back and letting his actors find the moment in the shot, like try to find your character. So in a way, for me, that was kind of thrilling to watch, while at the same time being, but I get it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to, I get what you're doing already. You don't have to go on for another 5 minutes trying to accomplish the same thing.
Right.
So again, it's a very 70s kind of feel. And yeah, you do want to kind of get and move it along. But I do like, I wanted to say this because it gets to the part where they do the deer hunt or whatever, and Mike takes down the deer in one shot. And they go back. You never see them. And again, for the deer, I think they just gave it a tranquilizer and they watched it kind of pass out, which is still kind of cruel in a way. But like, they go back to the bar and they're just kind of, because this is where it's going to change. And that's when you realize that the whole hour is like, it's setting you up for, like, this is how the characters are. Now, how are they going to be different? Again, you could do that in half an hour versus an hour and 7 minutes. But it gets to the part in the bar and it starts playing the music, the sad, John's playing the piano or whatever, and you get the melancholy feel of now things are going to change. You know what I mean? Now everything's going to be different. And I'm so glad, because all of a sudden you hear the helicopter, and then it gets builded louder and louder as the music stops and they're getting more melancholy, and then it just cuts to a village and you see the explosions go off, right? And number one, man, future filmmakers, if you ever make a Vietnam movie, please, for the love of all that's holy, don't use Creedence Clearwater Revival's Fortunate Son everybody does that. Like we talked about during the Forrest Gump thing, Zemeckis is never subtle, but for him to do that, and then again, we'll talk about all the things that played out in Vietnam and all the aftermath. Whenever I see a Vietnam movie made before Forrest Gump and I watch Forrest Gump again, it makes Forrest Gump look worse. Like it makes it look like, oh, Forrest Gump is just this movie. It's trying to do this movie instead of being its own thing. You know what I mean? It's just trying to copy everything we've seen before, and it's doing it in a more blunt way where there's no, I don't know, like you talk about the performances of Gary Sinise and stuff like that in Forrest Gump, but I can clearly see what they're trying to go for, especially with the John Savage character. But I mean, do we want to start talking about the Vietnam stuff now, or is that where we are?
Let's do that. I do want to say that I really appreciated that moment in the bar with the piano playing, and I liked that moment. I was like, okay, this is good. But again, it took too long to get to that place. But it was well done, and I liked the jump cut to Vietnam. I liked that it just got there. But I didn't like how they just happened to suddenly run into each other in this village. Oh, hey, Mike. Oh, hey, Nick. Oh, hey. Then all of a sudden they're prisoners of war in this thing. And they never show how they became prisoners. Now that there's all of a sudden prisoners. Did they? Did they show how they became prisoners?
So here's the thing. You talk about them jumping the line, right? I noticed 3 times, maybe twice, but the first time that I was like, wait, what happened? Did I miss something? And I had to rewind it. So you have Mike, who's the special forces, the Green Beret guy. He's all by himself. He lights the flame. You see the North Vietnamese, I think the North Viet. They never say that it's Vietnam, right? But you get that it's the North, because again, in the wars, the North Vietnamese versus the South Vietnamese, it was like a civil war that we kind of shoved ourselves into, trying to stop communism, stuff like that, because we thought we could, right? That's kind of the basis. That's just a nutshell of what the Vietnam War was. Like, there's so much more than that, but like, you get that it's the South versus the North, and you see all that, and you see the Americans interfering with that conflict, and then they land the helicopter, and it's Steven and it's Nick, and they run up, oh, hey, Mike, like, it's good to see you. And then I think they just cut, and it shows like a line of the Vietnamese soldiers, the enemy soldiers, marching forward towards camera. And then we cut, and they're in the prison camp.
Yeah, okay. So there wasn't any explanation of how they got there.
Yeah, I didn't, maybe it was the DVD, maybe it jumped or something, but like you get that, oh, they're under fire, but then where did the helicopters go? All this other, and again, maybe I'm missing something, but it did that later when Mike goes home and he's trying to lead the trailer and Linda's trying to make him stay, and she's like, no, I gotta go. I feel like I don't belong. And then it cuts to a hotel room where they're together. And I was like, oh, did I miss something again? Yeah. And so I tried to rewind it. And then the last time was when Mike, again, we're jumping ahead, Mike goes to visit Steven in the Veterans Hospital. And he's like, I'm getting you out of here. And Steven's like, well, you got to do what your heart feels like. And then it cuts to he goes back to Vietnam, right? You don't get the reunion scene between Steven and his wife. So it happened 3 times where I was like, wait, what happened? So that's where I was confused, because it felt like as long as everything else was, it felt funny to have those jump cuts in the middle where it wasn't established. You could
have spent time getting those transitions, worked out.
Yeah. So I'm glad I wasn't the only thing and again, maybe we're missing something, but I rewound it 3 times. Did I miss something? Nope. That's just what it does. You know what I mean? Okay. Rather than the next scene. So, but yeah, the thing with when you're reading about this, and again, I know that, like we said, the movie started out as something else. It started out being about card players, I think, in Las Vegas who got involved in Russian roulette. And then they were trying to, I think Michael Dealey was trying to shop the script around, and Cimino got a hold of it and thought he was going to rewrite it. So he rewrote it because Vietnam, it was very hot button at the time. Vietnam was not, it was still in the zeitgeist, like we talked about during the Godfather episode. Everybody was so disillusioned with that. Everybody was so disillusioned with the JFK assassination, with Richard Nixon, with Watergate, stuff like that, that to have Jaws and The Godfather come out, it kind of was refreshing to people, to have people go and see movies. You know what I mean? And so Vietnam was very,
it was, you didn't make movies about Vietnam. This is the first movie to make something about Vietnam, even though they don't specifically say that it's based there. I think Christopher Walken even did an interview saying, I didn't know it was Vietnam. We never spoke about it in those terms. You know what I mean? But it, you know, with the controversy of that, and today, and again, especially since we become friends with Wen Lei, who was on for our Fifth Element episode, I want to make sure that I want to be sure that we're respectful when we talked about this, because I don't want to seem like sinister or insensitive when we're talking about this stuff. But watching it again this time, because you watch it the first time, then you start hearing the controversies and oh yeah, they did do the Vietnamese dirty, right? But to me, you so little of the movie, the whole movie, its identity is based around Vietnam and these Russian roulette scenes, right? But it's relatively a small part of the movie. They're in Vietnam for maybe 40 minutes, including the beginning and the end, or something like that. You know what I mean? As opposed to the rest of the movie lasting so much longer. So to me, it was kind of refreshing, I guess, because they didn't spend so much time in Vietnam or in Saigon, and they didn't really, because I don't know how you feel about this, but the movie itself. Here's what the Deer Hunter is about, right? The Deer Hunter is about idealism that's kind of torn down, right? You're introduced to all these characters, our three main guys, Mike, Stephen, and Nick, and you get to know who they are, and it's about how they're broken down by the war, right? But I think you mentioned off camera, war does this to anybody, right? This is the effect that war has on people. I think Vietnam is a little more interesting because, you know, you look at World War One, you know who the enemy was. You look at World War Two, you're just out to stop the Nazis. You're out to stop, you know, Japanese soldiers from, again, not trying to be insensitive, from like moving forward and taking control, stuff like that. So there are clear bad guys. But for Vietnam, there were no clear bad guys. We didn't know what we were doing over there for most of the time, right? And so I just think that by limiting that time, it kind of skirts that controversy, or told me anyway that it doesn't matter when this would have happened. War is going to do this to anybody. Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah,
what are you?
exactly. It doesn't matter that it was Vietnam. It could have been any war. And honestly, you can get PTSD from any trauma, not
Yeah,
just having to go to war.
right.
So, but the point of this movie was, like you said, how they dealt with it and how they dealt with their PTSD, after the fact. But it could have been any war, and it could have been any trauma.
Yeah. And the thing with the Russian roulette is the controversy was, I mean, it makes such the movie makes it feel like that's what happened. You went to Vietnam, you fought people. If you got caught, you played Russian roulette with people, right? And the problem, I don't think this is a biopic, you know what I mean, or historical epic. I think it just happens to take place during Vietnam. You look at all that, I don't think historically accurate is what this movie was going for. Like I said, it was going for a feeling. So choosing Russian roulette, it's a metaphor. Like I think that's what Cimino locked onto. When you look at the characters, Mike hunting, and only he's known as one shot because it's about the skill. If you have to take more than one shot at the enemy, let's say the deer is the enemy, right? It's like you're not playing a fair game. It's like you're not giving them the chance to be who, I don't know, to be who they are, or not just be prey, but to be an actual physical being, right? And so the Russian roulette tests them. You have Nick, who's, again, we see in the bar, like he's trying to make bets on things. It's an interesting thing. I'm making a bet that this is going to happen within the first 15 minutes, right? It's weird that he does that, but again, he's a risk taker. That's what he does. He just, with Linda, he's like, let's just get married. So all that stuff. And then Steven, you look at the three guys. I mean, you look at the steel mill, that's American. You look at joining the army and fighting for your country, that's American, right? Steven is not only doing that, he's getting married. He's doing the responsible thing, right? He has something to lose now because he's getting married to Angela, right? So now to put him in the Russian roulette situation, you put Nick in there, who's a gambler. You put Steven in there, who doesn't want to be there, who's, I don't know. I would say Steven is most like us. Like, we're not going to be Mike, right? We're not going to be the gung ho, shoot everybody, like be the Superman type person. We're not going to be Nick, who's got the girl waiting for him at home. He's tall. He can fight, things like that. We're Steven. We're the ones that are crying in that prison camp. We're the ones. And again, even though it's short, when they're under the camp, just in the water, I can feel when Steven starts losing it, I can feel why he's losing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not
Yeah.
just like he's doing it just for an actorly thing. I mean, that's that's definitely what's happening. But it's like, I don't know. I'm going to keep bringing this up. This movie was all about feelings and the feelings that it gave you, and I think that stuff was very resonant and very, I don't know, potent. What did you think about
Yeah.
the filming, at least?
Yeah, it definitely gave a feeling at that moment. Like I said before, this is the time when I kind of perked up in the movie. I kind of, oh, okay, now something is getting interesting. I'm seeing some good acting. I'm seeing some good, just it
Ooh,
just got interesting, and I got
yeah.
excited about what I was watching. And I really, really like De Niro's performance when he's sitting across from Christopher Walken, and they're going back and forth with the gun. And he's getting slapped by the
Really
thing.
slapped. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they're
Yeah.
they're slapping them and they're making them put the gun to their head and all that stuff. That's intense. And to watch him go back and forth from like laughter and like anger, and then like just it's just so fun to watch. Christopher Walken doesn't do it, like the same type of performance, but he still does a good job. He's more like just emotional with it. But De Niro, man, he goes up and down because he's trying to fight. He's trying to save their lives,
Mhm.
and you see him playing with this and trying to like make sure the moment's right, make sure everything works. I don't know. I really, really like it. I think he did a really good job.
The roulette scenes are excruciating. Even though I knew what was going to happen, I knew what was going to happen to our main characters, but when they showed the other side characters, like the South Vietnamese, when they're being pulled out and they're also being forced to do this, right? I couldn't remember what happened to them. How I can't imagine what it would be like for a person to watch that for the first time, and just that what's going to happen. It's so intense, and the
Yeah,
way De Niro does this scream, like he slapped once or twice, and he starts screaming, I'm going to kill you, and he does this one scream that he does. I can't get it out of my head. It's so, I don't know how to explain. It's so real. Like in that, if you're being slapped and you're being psychologically broken down, it just felt so real. I think that,
yeah. And when
man,
he
that
pulls the
added to
trigger for the first time, that's what you're talking about, right? When he first pulls that trigger and and it clicks, and he kind of
it.
does a little scream, a little yell. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. It's haunting. A lot of that is haunting, right?
yeah,
Oh, holy mackerel. So again, I wrote that these are excruciating things to watch, but it's that survival, and it just feels, again, the verite kind of feel. They, when they escape and they're, the helicopter kind of gets stuck on the bridge or whatever, that really happened. Like they didn't plan on that happening. So when you see Savage and De Niro trying to wave, that was actually them saying, "Hey, stop this," but they kept it in camera.
I was going to mention that. That's some pretty physical stuff they had to do to climb up from the water onto that bridge, and they're all doing it barefoot too, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
I kept thinking, hope they don't get a splinter or anything.
Right, right.
But no, that was a good scene, and I was going to say I like the feeling you get, the relief you get when they do get away, when they
Yeah.
do get out of the situation, they get Steve out of the
Mhm.
where he's being held, and they get
Yeah.
going in the river on that log. It's a relief. You're like, oh, good, finally. And then the more trouble with the helicopter. But yeah, I
Mhm.
I like that moment.
So again, what they did, I think Zygmunt said he didn't want it to feel like he was shooting different movies. Like he didn't want it to seem like he was, because the movie, if you agree with this, it seems to move in three different movements, like three different acts. You have the beginning when they're in their hometown, and then you have the Vietnam stuff, obviously, and then it's when you go back and you see how everybody's disillusioned, right? So he didn't want to make, and again, Pennsylvania, I think, is where they set the,
Mhm.
and again, going with the American thing, sorry, a little bit of a side note, they're Russian immigrants.
Yeah, no,
It's American. Like they have pride in their country, right?
yeah.
During the wedding reception, it's interesting that the veteran comes in and they're so excited and happy and they're trying to get it out of him. What's it like over there? How is it? And he won't talk to him. He's like, F it. You know what I mean? And so that gives you an idea of what he's gone through that they haven't gone through yet, even though their experience is going to be different from, say, what Steve, again, I keep forgetting his name. Why do I keep forgetting Cazale's name? Right, Stanley. Right, it's going to be different from that. So you have those three movements. Zygmunt didn't want to feel like it was three separate movies, so it was shot the same. But what they did for the Vietnam footage is they duplicated what they shot and they kind of damaged it or drained the color from it or desaturated it. So if you watch those, the clear, crisp Pennsylvania shots or Ohio shots, and then the clean, crisp wilderness shots. that they get while they're hunting for the deer, and then you contrast that with the Vietnam stuff, which is very grainy, and it feels like more documentary. It feels like more verite. It feels like more, something captured on camera. I again, so much of this, you talked about the script not being great, but so much of it is done through like character work or stolen glances or through Zygmunt's visual stuff like that. So that's stuff that I really enjoyed about it. Again, this time, just trying to pick up on what is it visually trying to say. I think it's very strong that way. Even if the script isn't,
Yeah.
you know what I mean. Anyway, so
Yeah.
yeah, you have, and isn't it interesting how the three main characters, they experience trauma in different ways? They experience that disillusionment in different ways. I mean, what did you think about the actors in general and the actors of when they came back after that experience in the war?
I thought it was well done. Hey, hold on real quick. I want to mention this. I was going to say that you talked about them being Russian immigrants. When Nick is in the hospital and the doctor says, like, is that a Russian name? Trying to
Yeah.
ask what his last name is. Like, no, it's American.
Yeah.
So that's something that I was going to point out. But yeah, as far as the acting goes, I thought they all did a really good job. You don't really get to see too much of the Christopher Walken because he never comes home.
Yeah, he goes AWOL, right?
But you do see that he's disillusioned, and that he's pretty much lost his mind because
Yeah.
he's willing to put himself through that over and over and over. I think he's just has like a death wish or something.
He breaks.
Wants out, yeah.
Wasn't it interesting that scene in the hospital? I mentioned before that it's like Cimino trying to let his actors find the moment. I think Walken's kind of become a parody a lot of the time now, and it's easy to do an impression of him. It's easy to forget that sometimes he can be a very electric, very empathetic actor. And seeing him just sitting on that ledge, and the doctor just comes and asks his name, asks when his parents were, when he was born, who his parents are, and he can't vocalize it, or he just doesn't know. And that's, I think, when he starts breaking down because he's lost something.
No,
But
that was a really good moment. I like that moment.
What's funny though is the doctor just sits there. The doctor's not doing he's not reacting at all. He's just sitting there waiting for Walken to finish his line, it seemed like. So it's funny that the camera's waiting for Walken to, but the doctor's like just waiting just to finish. But yeah. Yeah. But his Walken's acting right there, you can just, I don't know. I don't think you need to go back and keep cutting back and seeing what Walken is going through, because we see him break right there. We see, and then when he comes back and he's all white as a ghost and his eyes are sunken in, there's a whole story there that we don't need to be. The movie could have been an hour longer. We could have sat through all that, right? I don't think we needed to see any of that. It's just interesting to see De Niro go back and all the pushing and shoving, and how there's no real pauses in that beginning when they're friends, but now there are so many awkward pauses, like they don't know how to talk to each other. That just felt very, very real to me. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can see that. I did like where Steven's character went. I like that, because that's pretty true to life. A lot of people come home and they don't know how to fit into society anymore.
Yeah.
And they, especially when they're injured like that and they're now disabled and he has to live in a wheelchair now.
Right.
And then I did have a question about this though. Like, so Nick is sending the money from the bets to Angela, and Angela is sending them in socks to Steven. Is that correct?
I think so.
That's what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay. So why would Nick send money to Steven's wife? Why would he not send the money to Linda?
I don't know. Does he know where Steven is? Does he just know?
That's the other thing.
Yeah,
so how does he know?
We see Nick try to make the phone call and he can't connect to Linda, and so that's the last time he tries to reach anybody.
Yeah, but he has to know where she's living. She's living with his in Michael's place, right?
Yeah.
So he knows to send the money there if he wants to send money to somebody. That's who you think he would send money to. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's just I kind of missed that it was maybe it's because I don't know, maybe I was lost in that moment, but I just thought that he was sending money to that hospital. Maybe Angela's forwarding that, because Angela knows where he is, right? Maybe she's forwarding it on to him, but why wouldn't she keep that for herself? Because she needs that money.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right. But it's like it's interesting too, though, that Nick has the wherewithal to send money to Steven, but he doesn't seem to know who Mike is when Mike shows up at the
Yeah, another point. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting, but again, trauma. I don't know. Like maybe he just has these moments of clarity where he's sending his money that he's winning because he doesn't have any way to spend it. Like he's not spending. He's just out there. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Just living day to day. So maybe he doesn't need the money. I just thought that was again is. And you talk about Steven's character when Mike goes to visit Angela and she's just comatose. She can't say anything. She has to write things down. I mean, and Linda too, like she's latched onto Nick even though he's clearly not coming back, right? And Mike is right there, and it's interesting watching Mike and Linda try to form a bond, even though she's still hung up on Nick and he's still hung up on the war. It's fascinating that Mike wears his uniform like constantly, like
Mhm.
longer than he should, but that's all to point out that he's in a different he doesn't have any identity besides what he is in that uniform now. It seems like when he finds out that Nick is passing on that money, that's when he changes because he's got a new purpose to go and find Nick, right?
Right.
But with Steven, again, pointing out the Lieutenant Dan stuff from Forrest Gump, how they make, and again, that's fine because it gives Gary Sinise a chance to act, but in here it's different because it's what's not said with the Steven character that's so powerful. Like we can tell that he's lost. He doesn't feel right being with Angela. He doesn't have his legs. Like he doesn't have what's necessary to be a man around her. And he feels like this is his identity in the hospital. That's what he is. He can get along with other people just like him. Right. And he just needs a friend. He just needs Mike to walk in there and say, no, we're taking you out of here. Like you have a wife, you have a child, you have responsibilities, you need to move on. That's when Mike decides to move on. That's when he goes. And so again, that's what we're talking about. Now we're getting into a plot. Like the longer the movie goes on, now we're talking about scenes leading to the next scene, leading to the next scene. And I agree with you that whole beginning is too long, but in a way, I think it works for me because by the time it starts building and moving forward, there's again a real sense of feeling, a real sense of people and of character here, and of the experiences that they're going through. And I don't know if, like you talk about The Godfather, if they'd cut all that stuff out, would it have had that same impact on me, or would it just have been a thing to brush off? Because that whole last thing with the Russian roulette with Mike and Nick, I was in tears this time,
Oh, really?
just because of how, I don't know, like he's lost. There's a moment, and I'm trying not to spoil it for people. Actually, maybe we just have to spoil it. But when Nick finally has that moment of clarity and he sees Mike, and he's like, Mike, one shot, right? And you think, oh, he's getting through to him. But in his eyes, he's still gone. There's
Hmm.
just something that's not there. And so I don't know, man, like how Mike goes in and says, the only way I can get through to you is to play this game with you, right? And how he's holding the gun to his head and he's like, I love you, before he takes that shot. They've never said that, right? And it doesn't go off. And it's Nick's turn, and he puts us, you don't have to do this. And there's that moment of clarity. But when Nick moves his arm aside and does it anyway, and just the reaction that Mike has, like I was like, like we said at the end of the Godfather episode, I was like, I've just got one word for you with the Deer Hunter. Oh, and
Yeah.
it's all because I remember that last moment of the movie. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
It, I get it. It's very impactful. I think it's very, it's an intense moment. It's very emotional.
yeah.
But this time I laughed because he started shaking his head while he was like, instead of, this person is mortally wounded, and he's bleeding from his head, and he's, yeah, putting pressure on his head and trying to stop the bleeding, but he's also just shaking the crap out of his head. I'm
Yeah,
like, stop shaking him, enough with the pushing and shoving already,
yeah,
like
yeah.
he's dying, you're trying to help him the best you can. Don't shake him and push him around anymore than, Anyway, so I started laughing a little bit.
Yeah,
It was kind of
I
funny.
can see that. Yeah, I agree with you. In the, I think in the moment you first see it, maybe you don't notice stuff like that because you're so
Yeah.
caught up in the thing. But it's the, again, I didn't notice the shaking so much. It's just I couldn't. It was just Mike just yelling, Nick, Nick, no, no, and it's just, I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
haunting.
Yeah, it's definitely sad.
It's just haunting.
Um, okay, I wanted to mention this because we kind of were on it with Angela. Who is the father of the baby? Because Steven says he
He
wasn't
didn't do it
with
with
her.
her.
So
I
that
don't.
baby's not Steven's.
That's an interesting point. Cimino in an interview, I believe, said that Nick is the father of the baby,
Oh, really?
and I'm like, I don't get any like.
what? You know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
I read something that it was Michael, that Mike is the father,
interesting.
which would be interesting because when Mike goes and sees Angela, his son, I guess, points the gun at him and like clicks the toy gun.
Yeah. If you look at it, like we talked about stolen glances, like the visual language of how it's obviously Nick and Linda together, but you can tell Mike has an attraction to her, feelings for her, and they keep meeting each other's eyes. You know what I mean? It's like, I get that. Like, there's a relationship. I have no sense that anybody has a relationship with Angela. You know what I mean? There's when Steven and Angela are taking that drink and they're trying not to spill, and you see the drops on her dress, which is heartbreaking, by the way, because you know what's going to happen. You're like, oh, this isn't going to turn out good.
Yeah.
But like, I didn't get any sense that anybody else, you know what I mean, had any relationship with her. So to hear that Nick is the father of her baby, I was like, that doesn't feel right at all. You know, where does that come from? That's not explored. So I'm glad that never came out in the movie. It's just weird that Cimino later was like, haha, it was Nick. I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. So again, I don't know what the point of. I think maybe it was just because Steven is being the good guy and he's trying. If she's saying that she had, I don't think it matters who she slept with. He's just doing the honorable thing and making her his wife, so she doesn't have to lose face in the town or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting kind of plot point.
Yeah.
What did you think? Oh, go ahead.
I want to bring up the end, the funeral and everything, and then
that's where I was going. Right.
Okay. Yeah. That's actually a really nice moment. I like when they all come back together, and everybody's so somber and they're so solemn, and they're coming, to the bar where they used to always hang out, and they, and I like that John's like making these eggs. There's a really good moment with him when he walks back in the kitchen to make the eggs, and he breaks down.
Yeah.
Like, I almost broke down watching him break down just in that moment right there. And I was like, wow, that was really good to get me to almost cry just in that one little moment. And I've been kind of laughing the whole movie, counting all the pushes and shoves. You know what I mean? So I get to this moment, and this character that I didn't really get that close to suddenly starts crying, and I go, oh, you know what I mean? That's right. This is really sad, And so I started to cry right at that moment. But yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, I get that you could cut half an hour, 45 minutes out of the beginning. I just think by the time it gets to this ending, I didn't feel like it was superfluous at all. I think that it did the job of involving me. And I don't know, like, if they cut that stuff out, would I have felt the same way? Would I have felt that something was missing? I'm just sitting there at the end when they get back. They come back and they have the funeral, and Mike is looking at the casket, you know what I mean? And they go back, and you just see how this is and everybody's different. Nothing's going to be the same. I just got a real sense of place and a real sense of people. So all that stuff leading up, what felt like 14 hours leading up to this moment felt like it was earned, because I know these people and I get the feeling for what they've lost when they don't know how to talk to each other. And all they know how to do, when John starts singing God Bless America, it was controversial at the time, because they thought it was like a rah-rah kind of jingoistic thing of sounding like America's great. I don't think that's what it is at all. Like, Mike and Linda are having a hard time talking to each other. They're still looking at each other. When they start singing that song, it's something that they know. It takes them back to that time when they had their ideals, before everything was broken, before everything was changed. So they're like, yeah, let's go back to this time where we had that bond. And they sing God Bless America. It's not to me, it's not jingoistic at all. It's not doing that. It's to bring these people back down to earth and say they had this connection. What was the connection? Even though it's completely different, completely changed, there's a feeling of hope now, even though they've lost one of their own, that they're going to be able to move on.
Yeah, but you can't argue that, their country unites them. Being American unites them. And so singing that song makes them feel like they're together again.
Russian immigrants.
Yeah.
I know what I mean?
That. I think that's really impactful. I think it's meaningful. And I liked it. I liked it ended with that.
Yeah. So I don't know. We can, like we talked about the Vietnamese stuff. Yeah, it's maybe insensitive the way that the way they treat them as one note. You know what I mean? We don't get any subtitles for the enemy. We don't know what they're saying. We get a sense of what they're saying, but we don't know exactly. We don't know their thoughts. There's no stereotypical character who's like the bad guy that they have to take out. Like, it looks, the way that they're shot, all the enemy characters in that section, they're interchangeable. It's like it could be anybody. They're all just one entity. right? So there's that controversy, but I like that to me, it just sidestepped it. So this could be any war. That's what I got from Russian roulette can happen anywhere, right? You were saying something about Russian roulette even affecting us, like
Oh
here.
yeah, we had an acquaintance in junior high school that ended up playing Russian roulette. I'm not sure why, but she ended up losing her life.
Right.
Yeah, it was really a sad time.
Yeah, I remember specifically being in New York because I would go back again, visit my family during that time. And I think it was Jenny, one of our mutual friends or something, that she wrote me a letter and talked about this girl and how she killed herself. And I was like, oh, it was hard. Like, oh, I know. And you're a teenager. You try to be like the woe is me kind of, I'm going to make this personal so that I can make this about me in a way. Right. And so I remember talking to her and it feels so sad that I lost one of my friends. And then later you find out, oh no, they were drunk. They were playing around with a gun. Right. And they were playing Russian roulette and she just happened to be at the wrong end of a bullet. And so I remember thinking, oh, like what a terrible, dumb way to go. Like, why? There's
Yeah.
no choice in that.
She was really well liked too, and she was really popular
Yeah.
and friendly, and I think everyone really liked her. So it was really a sad time.
Right. So again, that can happen to anybody, right? Not trying to make this about us, but it's like that Russian roulette is just it's something that affected them. It's something that changes the whole dynamic of the movie. So that doesn't bother me. Like the them singing God Bless America can be seen as controversial. You have every right to be offended by something like that. When they had the Venice Film Festival, I think in '79 for this, like there were walkouts and people like quit the jury because they didn't want to have to vote for this movie that was getting such high favor because they thought it was offensive, right? That's a natural reaction to something like this. And again, I think that's what makes a movie interesting is when you have those. This isn't a safe movie. You know what I mean? There's nothing about this movie that feels safe. Even the verite stuff, even the jumping the line, it doesn't feel. I don't know. It doesn't feel like it hardly feels like a movie. It doesn't feel like any other movie that I've watched before. So I like that it has that tone of anything can happen. I don't know. Maybe I'm just going on to, but you get what I'm saying, right? It just feels like it has something to say, and I think whether you agree with it or not, I think that's important to have in a movie.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, but yeah,
Okay.
was there anything else? I know I wanted to mention Cazale because he was in 5 movies, but those 5 movies, you had The Godfather, you had The Godfather 2, you had The Conversation, you had Dog Day Afternoon, you had The Deer Hunter. If you're only going to be in 5 movies, whoa, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I like the story because Michael Dealey, when he had the script, he wanted somebody to sell the movie on, and that's where they got Robert De Niro, because Robert De Niro was hot off of Mean Streets, hot off of Godfather 2, hot off of Taxi Driver. 2 years from now, he's going to be in The Raging Bull, which I think is my personal greatest performance I've ever seen on a screen. So he's 2 years away from that, right? So they got Robert De Niro, and because De Niro was so big in New York, he pulled Meryl Streep. He got Cazale, right? So he was able to pull all these people. He was there with Cimino, like on set, like doing scouting locations, doing the improvs of the actors. Robert De Niro went and met with steel mill people and introduced himself as Bob, and nobody knew who he was, right? So De Niro was like right there. But the sad thing about Cazale was that this isn't the sad thing, but he was dating Meryl Streep at the time, and so she wanted to be with him because he was diagnosed with terminal cancer by this point. So he was going to die. And Cimino knew it. De Niro knew it. The studio didn't know it till later. They wanted to fire him. But Streep was like, no, you fire him, I'm walking away. Cimino was like, you fire him, I'm walking away. De Niro, I'm walking away. They wouldn't insure him. De Niro paid for his insurance because he wanted Cazale to be in the movie. And then they shot all of his stuff first. And then he died before the movie premiered. You didn't get to see it. What do you think of Cazale, like as an actor? From what
I like him. I like him a lot. I think he's great. Uh, I don't know. I agree with you that those are really good movies to have on your resume. I think he does well in all of them. So yeah, he probably would have only gone up from there. But it's pretty sad he had to go when he did. But you can tell he was sick. You can tell he did not look good in this movie.
No, he didn't. And it's one of those things where I think he just made such not really an impact, but he was there enough that you knew who he was. And it's kind of sad that you're like, oh, I would have liked to seen him in more movies. You know what I mean? He went too soon. But just briefly on Cimino, are you familiar with any other movie that Cimino has made?
Not really. Like, yeah, I looked at his filmography. I couldn't see anything that I really had seen or even knew about, really.
Yeah, I know that he wrote Silent Running. I know that he wrote Outlaw Josie Wales. So those are obviously big. He directed Thunderbolt and Lightfoot with Clint Eastwood and Jeff Bridges, I remember it being okay, that movie, but I don't know if it was more because Clint Eastwood and Jeff Bridges were the draw versus any of the action or plot. But like, yeah, they gave him this movie and they gave him a lot of leeway and he had a lot of creative freedom. And I think they were trying to get like a shorter cut of the movie and a longer cut. And the rumor is that they previewed the shorter cut for people, and Cimino paid the projectionist to stop the movie in the middle, like pretend the film broke, so that the longer version would have a better kind of reception. But yeah, after this, because we talked about in the 70s, you had all the 50s, 60s over like the big budget stuff, and that's what made and they bombed, and that's what made studios think, let's start giving these movies to these new voices. They're working. Coppola, Spielberg, Scorsese, De Palma. These are exciting filmmakers. They're making us money. I think Cimino fit right in with that. That's where The Deer Hunter came from. But it's interesting because his next movie, Heaven's Gate, is a notorious disaster of a film that went so over budget. It came out and people just didn't buy the pretentiousness of it. It just bombed critically, box office wise. In a way, I think they blamed Heaven's Gate on the end of giving the auteur everything. And maybe that's where the 80s came from. We talked about the 80s being the decade of excess, right? I mean, what do you think that ties in at all? Do you think that's interesting?
Yeah. I mean,
It's a weird trajectory, right?
yeah,
Of
yeah,
seeing
yeah,
the
yeah.
directors.
I mean, it's I can see how something like that would make I think giving the filmmaker, total freedom like they did with Cimino on this one, I think maybe they would say, what, let's give let's put some reins on these directors. Not maybe they shouldn't give everything they want,
Yeah.
because it's been the whole decade they've been letting directors do what they want and experiment and try new things. I think they kind of started to pull back on that a little bit and tried to maybe control the directors a little more.
Well, you could tie it into Lucas. You could tie it into Spielberg. I think going from Star Wars to the Phantom Menace, it was all about, Star Wars was a group effort. Everybody was working to make that movie good. It wasn't just Lucas, because Lucas didn't know what the hell he was doing most of the time. Like his crew didn't trust him and things like that. They were just trying, and by a miracle, it worked and it hit the zeitgeist at the time. So by the time Phantom Menace came around, people just didn't, they thought Lucas was the auteur. They didn't want to tell him no. It wasn't, excuse me, it wasn't like a group effort. It was more of a Lucas effort, right? But then you look at Spielberg, who they're letting do whatever he wants, but he always comes in under budget. He always comes in under schedule. And his run of movies, forgetting 1941 for a little bit, you're having Jaws and Close Encounters, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and E.T. and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. You're letting Spielberg do what he wants, but it's working. It's still working for him. So don't stop. I think that was the case with Heaven's Gate, is that, the Deer Hunter. You know what I mean? Let him do whatever he wants. It worked so much last time. And I think his ego just ran wild. And so that kind of broke him. He made like Year of the Dragon. After that, with Mickey Rourke, which I guess is okay. He made The Sicilian with Christopher Lambert, which you should never make a movie with Christopher Lambert. You know what I mean? And Desperate Hours later on, it's like his career just kind of went nowhere, like nosedived.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Would you say that The Deer Hunter, as for all its faults, for all the criticisms we have on it, Johnny, would you say that if you were only to direct one movie in your lifetime, if The Deer Hunter was that movie, I mean, is that good enough?
Well, I mean, I think it definitely made an impact. And I think the interesting parts are good. The parts that I don't find interesting, I don't think are good.
Yeah.
But I think the parts that worked. And so I think that's good enough. That's good enough to, you can be proud of that. And he should be proud of that.
Right. Okay. It's just, it's so interesting just having a one and done kind of career. But like I said, I mean, there's the emotions that this movie creates are just like nothing else. So if that's all he's known for, then good. At least he's been able to have that, kind of sear into my soul a little bit. So as far as The Deer Hunter goes, I mean, that's what I feel about it. It's just, it creates that feeling in me, and yeah, I think it's great. So
yeah. Do you have any favorite Vietnam movies or war movies that you want to discuss for a second? Or
Well, it's interesting if you're thinking of war movies. This movie isn't really about what it was like to fight in the war. Like, you know what I mean? It was about after the war and the effects that it has on you, the psychological damage that it does. If I were to like rank movies, I think I would always rank them according to, I don't know if there's a greatest war movie ever made, but I know there's a great World War One movie. I know there's a greatest World War II movie. I know there's a greatest Vietnam movie. I know that did I say that already? There's a, there's all these different. So as far as that goes, I think All of Quiet on the Western Front, the 31 film, I think that has, what happens in that movie has just been regurgitated in almost every war movie ever. I think The Hurt Locker is the most like All Quiet on the Western Front, where it has a kid that's so excited and he goes in the war and he's disillusioned and he can't handle it, so he goes back, and that's where it's the same plot as The Hurt Locker. And so that is kind of my ultimate World War One movie. I think World War II, we've talked about it, Saving Private Ryan really gets and nails the feel of what it was. Even though I didn't fight in the war, it gets the feel of what it was like to be there and what was lost and how it affected you. And the way that the battle scenes are shot, not in a John Wayne raw way, but in a very documentary kind of harrowing, I don't want to be here screaming for my mommy kind of way. I mean, that it really gets that feel. And then for Vietnam, like I said, Vietnam was psychedelic. It was like you couldn't get a beat on it. What why are we out here? What are we doing? Why am I out here for so long? And so soldiers would revert to drugs, and it was, like I said, it was a very hallucinogenic, psychogenic kind of thing. I think Apocalypse Now really nails that feeling of what it's like to be in the war. So I don't know. I kind of look at war movies as being what feeling that they give, or the sense of place, or how well they sell what it was like at the time. Best Years of Our Lives is also a really good one, talking about the veterans that come home. That's a World War II kind of thing. So yeah, there are all sorts of war movies that we can point out. Dunkirk is a great one. I loved how it was a visual movie, but I don't really count Dunkirk as a war movie as much of an experimental kind of look at how time is approached in movies. I think it was Christopher Nolan looking at it and thinking, well, war movies have been done, but I'm going to do it in a different way and take these three different timelines and kind of meld them together, even though they didn't take place at the same time. And as far as movie narratives go and making you think and feel that they do, I think that was very interesting. But I don't count Dunkirk as a war movie as much as an experimentation movie. I don't know. What about you? What are some of your favorite war
well,
stories?
I do like Saving Private Ryan. That always stands out to me. One movie that really affected me when I was younger, a war movie, Platoon.
Yeah.
Oliver Stone, right?
Yep.
That one, that one stayed in my mind for a long time. It still does. And so when I think of war movies, that movie always comes to mind.
Yeah.
But it was just, man, it affected me. Maybe
Right.
we'll talk about it later on in our podcast. But
Right.
and I haven't seen Apocalypse Now, so but we might talk about that during the season. So
Okay.
stay tuned.
Okay. Excellent. But yeah, I mean, war movies is definitely a genre. I just don't know if I agree with the John Wayne kind of approach to it, of it's all gung ho and it's great to be out there, do it for your country kind of thing, because war is awful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
It's
just
fantastic.
it's fan. I'm so glad that you brought that up. Nobody brings up that Miguel Ferrer line from from Hot Shots Part 2 as much as they should. That's great. Anyway.
All right, well, that'll do it for Deer Hunter, I think. So
Yeah.
what's our next episode, Darren?
Okay, well, I'm trying to be a little. Originally, I planned in a different movie, but I've become, and I want to save this, I've become friends with somebody that's kind of a big deal for us, especially being like the little podcast that we're on. I've become friends with this gentleman on Twitter. And so I've been talking with him a little bit. And so I thought, maybe, maybe I'll ask him, take your shot, what can it hurt? He's just going to say no, right? That's the worst thing that can happen. But what movie, since we're talking about 70 movies, what I like to do? And I thought, well, I think this person's as an animator. He's worked on animated films. Why not look at Robin Hood, the Disney cartoon? Because if you're looking at, again, we're looking at the scope of things. During the 70s, Disney was in a rut. They were trying to find themselves after Walt had died. And so Robin Hood, out of all of those movies, like The Rescuers and Sword in the Stone, things like that, which I don't think are good movies at all. I think Robin Hood is the one that has like a feeling to it and is enjoyable. So I thought, well, if there's any movie I'd like to talk about this gentleman with, I'd love to talk about with him. So yeah, we're going to talk Robin Hood with a very,
we've had great guests on before, but this is I'm really excited. I'm excited to have this conversation with this guy. And because it's Robin Hood's 50th anniversary, he contacted me. Derek messaged me and said, hey, why don't we do this now? So we can kind of tie in with that 50th anniversary. So yeah, we're going to talk Robin Hood. We're going to have a great friend / special guest next time. I really hope that everybody listening to this listens to that. So.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, awesome.
And for NostalgiaCast, we'll see you next time. I am Jonny.
And I'm Darin.
And I don't have a quote. I don't know if you have one, but I don't have one.
F&A.
Oh. So poetic.
That's right. All right.